This gathering this evening, the second part of it, we focus now on how we can mitigate the climate crisis, which was addressed by South London senior church leaders in their joint statement on injustice following this year's week of prayer for Christian unity. I'm sure many of you remember that. Since then, we have seen one of the UK's largest ever climate protests in London last month, and yet to date. The government has made no official response to the protests, but we will consider in this churches network how the churches' work so far has been pushed forward and presently, and some of the ways that you and I can respond as individuals and as church leaders, and how our churches that we lead can also work together in our response. And to lead us in this discussion this evening, we have a few keynote speakers, first of which is Revd Vanessa Elston. Sorry, our first keynote speaker is Michele Vianello, who is a senior policy officer in the climate team for the Greater London Authority. And second is Revd Vanessa Elston, the pioneer priest in climate spirituality and action in Battersea Deanery, in the Church of England, in the Diocese of Southwark. She will draw out key findings from the latest IPCC Synthesis Report to show why the next 7 years are critical for securing a livable, habitable future for all, and why churches need to engage politically to influence policy, and how the climate crisis speaks to deeper levels of change and conversion across society and the church. Our third speaker is Melanie Nazareth and Holly Patterson. They'll be doing a duo, both of Christian climate action. They will look at the big one climate protest last month and help us to explore what is next for churches to do together. And without much ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Michele, Senior Policy Officer, the climate team of the Greater London Authority. Over to you, Michele.
Many thanks, Bishop, for the kind introduction, and also thanks for having me this evening to the whole CTSL. I'm going to share my screen now, which we have tested earlier, but there are always hiccups when actually one does it for real. Let's try. Can I confirm that you can see my screen, my slide?
Yes, we can. Do you want to use the slideshow?
You mean the full screen? I already did that. Does it show as full screen at the moment, or it doesn't?
Not yet.
Not yet. Sorry. Let me try again that. How about now?
That does now. Thank you.
Thank you. So my presentation this evening will focus on an initiative that we've been running over the last 3 years. This is the fourth iteration, and it's called Cool Spaces. It's part of the GLA efforts to support community groups as well as boroughs and other London stakeholders to support the adaptation of the city to increasingly hotter temperatures in the summer. And essentially, Cool Spaces is a GLA managed register of indoor venues to help Londoners cope during hot weather and in case of extreme weather events, such as those that we saw last year when we had 40+ degrees for the first time in the UK. Over the previous iterations, we also had a focus on outdoor spaces, and I'm going to touch upon those later in my presentation. But from this year, following those extreme events, we are focusing more on indoor spaces because in general, they tend to support better the reduction of potential harm to health from extreme temperature. So the essential standards to qualify is that spaces need to be open to all, have a lower temperature than outdoors, either through natural ventilation or because of the characteristics of the building itself, or have AC. Have free sitting space to rest and recover, and have free drinking water. I really need to apologize in case you can hear my little daughter in the other room crying. I hope it's not loud. Depending on the hours and levels of accessibility and whether there are toilets accessible, spaces can be categorized as tier 1 or tier 2, and that helps users of the map understand what they can expect to find in different spaces. So this is the back end. When it comes to the user's perspective, the Cool Spaces register is a map. It's a customizable map that can be accessed from laptop devices, from screen devices, and it's optimized for phone use. It has different layers that relate to the different spaces, and also has complementary data that we extracted from different databases, such as data on canopy cover or water bodies. And these are meant to indicate areas of London where the average temperature over different years has been lower than other parts. I want to just give you a quick overview of how the Cool Spaces project was conceived, because I think it's important for you to understand what's the background to this. I think it's important to understand that Cool Spaces is not a public health intervention. It is aligned to public health policy and to potential response to incidents such as heat waves. And it does that by being aligned to the time frame of the UK HSA heatwave planning for England. And it has a dedicated page complementary to the map that includes a summary of the NHS advice regarding hot weather and the risks to health. And it also supports the mayor's role as a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act, for example, in terms of amplifying heat messaging from the Met Office or from the NHS itself. But over the years, the objectives of the projects have changed slightly. At the beginning, during year 1 and 2, the idea was to align mildly to potential incidents. And by incidents, I mean heat waves, prolonged heat waves. And there was also a component regarding the ability of Londoners and visitors to the city to use the city during a day out, for example, for leisure, using London for leisure, or during their commute, or while out for errands. Of course, last year we saw very worrying extreme events for the first time in this country. Record temperature of 40+ degrees, and that has led us to focus more on indoor spaces. And we saw that there was a process of reinforcement of our focus on indoor spaces from the public, from space managers. As heat waves brought more attention to the heat risk, there was an increased engagement with the spaces themselves and with the map. And so Cool Spaces is almost naturally transitioning to some extent into a response instrument. And we are gathering more evidence to understand how we can do that more effectively. So for the time being, our main instrument to monitor the actual effectiveness of the spaces is monitoring the visits to the map. And in 2022, we had over 100,000 map visitors. And 91% of them visited during heatwave days, which gave us an indication that Cool Spaces might be filling a gap in the response. And also, we saw that there is a focus from users on indoor spaces. And then there are also interesting data coming from the geographical spread. and I'm not going to go into the details now, but you can look at the slides. Essentially, we understand that there is a more evenly spread interest in indoor spaces across the city. So for summer 2023, we are working very closely with our public health unit in order to revise the criteria that we used to have and make sure that they're based on better evidence to help reduce potential harm to health from very high temperatures. And we're trying to tilt the project towards engaging better with community and voluntary organizations, encouraging more spaces to sign up, including faith-based organizations and community spaces such as yourselves. The objective is to continue to increase the offer, and last year we already had a significant increase from 41 in 2021 to 131 indoor venues registered. So these are the criteria, and I will share them with you after this meeting so you can look at them with your own time. Claire has kindly offered to do that for me, so thanks for that. But essentially, the key difference between tier 1 spaces and tier 2 spaces is that tier 1 spaces are open for longer hours and for at least 5 days a week, whereas tier 2 spaces are only open during specified hours at least 2 days a week. And then there are differences in terms of the accessibility of the space and whether toilets are available in that space. Just for clarity, it's important to note that while we will not be assigning tiers to outdoor spaces any longer, because we don't want to encourage people to be outdoors in case of a heat wave, there will still be open spaces signposted on the map, but only those that have all the key amenities to support people coping in hot weather will be there. So those amenities are shaded seating, free drinking water available, and toilets. But those spaces, those outdoor spaces, won't have tiers, and we are not encouraging people necessarily to use them in case of very hot weather. So that's an overview of the initiative itself. I also wanted to share something else that the GLA has been working on and is now freely accessible to everyone. And it's a climate risk tool. It's called Climate Risk Map. And it has different data on it. I'm going to discuss the data that are available for heat risk, but be aware that there is also the possibility of interrogating the datasets to understand what is the risk from surface flooding, which I know is also something that this group has considered addressing with local communities, and so and it is of course a very serious, increasingly menacing risk for London. So here you have a very small preview, and in the next slide I'm going to show you the map at a larger scale. But essentially the map has a central slider that allows users to visualize on the left the overall heat risk or surface flooding risk, which is a visualization of different metrics. It's an index, so it means that aggregate values from different data sets, and you have those in the brackets. They are essentially data sets on either risk or exposure to risk, and they are presented at a very small geographical scale. And on the right side of the map, one can only switch on one specific data set. For example, the population that is under the age of 5, which is a demographic that is specifically particularly at risk from very high temperatures. So that all sounds a bit maybe intimidating, but I'm going to show you now the same map at a larger scale to give you a feel for how this looks. And in the next slide, I'm gonna give you a few examples of how this map can be used for your own purposes if you feel inclined to explore it. So here on the left side, you see the overall risk regarding heat for different small-scale areas of London, statistical areas. And on the right is just the percentage of the population that is under the age of 5. But here on the right, one could switch on other data that are relevant maybe for your community, such as the population over 75 or the percentage of the population that is from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So just a few examples very quickly. I don't want to take too much of your time. This map can help organizations with specific strengths, for example, experience of supporting over 75s, assess where people at risk are concentrated and where they can offer help in the most effective way. Or, for example, we are exploring with other stakeholders the opportunity for organizations to pool resources to achieve certain objectives. For example, have spaces be open longer in certain locations. For example, sharing volunteers or sharing other resources to make sure that spaces that are located in a certain area where there is a particular risk can be open for the amount of time that is required to be on the Cool Spaces map. And organizations can also prioritize investments in their assets. They can be also investments in kind, or they can be used to find resources from funders or from other organizations. For example, if a space as an open space adjoining to their venue, that can be a very significant asset for communities where there is a deficiency of public open spaces. These are just 3 examples, but of course, if you start thinking about those maps, you can understand how your community, which I'm sure you know very well, has specific vulnerabilities, specific exposure to risks, and hopefully, we hope that this map can help you to corroborate your understanding with hard evidence. So on final slides, I would like you to consider registering a space with us if you're able to, if you have the resources and volunteers to keep a space open. That would be, of course, fantastic. I will share a link also for this. Essentially, if you search GLA Cool Spaces, next to the map, you will see there are different tabs. One of them is called Register a Cool Space, and it's an online form. It's very easy to fill in. You can try. And again, I will share this link separately. It takes very little time, 5-10 minutes at most. And I just would like to thank you very much for having me this evening, and I hope that you are able to register a space. And if you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to write to the address that is on the screen now, fireandresilience@london.gov.uk, or you can also use my personal email, which is with the same ending, and it's my name .surname, which you can see also on the screen. It's a bit difficult to spell, so it's better if you just copy it from the screen, I guess. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Very much, Michele. We're very grateful for that. And now, without much ado, I'm going to invite Revd Vanessa Elston, who's going to speak, discuss the theology and the urgency of
Thank you.
Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Bishop. So I realize this is a challenging evening because there's all of us with PowerPoints and we all have limitations to how much information we can take in. So I'm going to just go quite quickly through something of the climate science, and then I'm just going to speak to you as a talking head. But I feel that the climate science, the reason I'm doing that is because in my experience of speaking to churches, I've become really aware that because we don't have any general public education happening around the science of climate, lots of people just haven't really grasped it. And And we might want to ask, why hasn't our government been educating the public about this critical situation? So there's a massive void, and lots of the media, as we know, unfortunately, they're caught up in culture wars. And as a result, the climate crisis has also been caught up in culture wars. So some papers just hardly report it, or they're almost deny its severity. So we have a deep lack of awareness within the public realm still. You have to basically really want to know to find out. So I just thought I'd briefly share. Some of you will know a lot of this stuff, but perhaps as you watch, you might just like to think about, I wonder if people in my church, I wonder what they would know, or their understanding of the climate crisis. So I'm just going to foist another little PowerPoint onto you. Let me share this and then put it onto play from start. And I will go through this fairly quickly. But this first slide is just showing us the relationship, the basic science, which is how the grey curve is the levels of CO2 and how they have been increasing increasingly rapidly, and how that relates to temperatures. So the coloured bars here are the temperatures. So we can just see a basic correlation between global temperature rises and the level of CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are sitting in our atmosphere. And perhaps the shocking thing is that despite all of these international COP conferences, we still haven't managed to shift this steep increase. And we're still on a trajectory of increasing greenhouse gases. And why is this so significant? Well, it's because the basic science is that unfortunately greenhouse gases don't just disperse, but a lot of them just sit there and they reflect back the heat, and therefore they increase the heat, and eventually they disperse, but they take time to disperse. And therefore there's only a certain amount that we can put up there where the physics says that will tip global temperatures over a certain place. So it's cumulative, something that happens over time, but physics means brutally that once you reach a certain point, you will then unlock certain tipping points within our climate system. So things like the melting of the glaciers becomes locked in, we can't stop it. Global sea currents, they're already starting to slow down. We could drastically change the how our global sea currents that are vital in maintaining our current climate stability. How the permafrost starts to melt. So there are things that once we go past a certain amount of CO2, we unlock tipping points, and 1.5 and 2 degrees of global temperature rise are both considered very critical levels at which certain things will be unlocked. And this is something about technical, but these are the kind of gigatons of CO2 we've got left in our carbon budget. This is what we've used up from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to 2019. And of course, we know that we've played a massive part in that as the originators of the Industrial Revolution. But this is what we've got left in terms of our global carbon budgets. And basically this one, we've got a really, and I haven't got the exact figure, but I think it's about to the end of this decade before we've used up the carbon budget until we're definitely going over 1.5. And then this is for 2 degrees of global heating. And that I think is about another possibly 30 years, but we haven't got very long in terms of how much we've got left to use up. And I think the main point about this latest summary report, so basically the IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. In March 2023, they produced their latest report, and it was important because they combined the reports of all the last 5 years. So they summarized them, they brought them all together with the latest knowledge they've got, and also there won't be another one until 2027. So this moment was very significant in terms of gathering up where are we now. And probably the greatest summary point for this report is actually we have a rapidly closing window to secure a livable and sustainable future. In fact, we've got 7 years in terms of this accumulation of greenhouse gases. So we need to stop thinking just in terms of, oh, it's about 2050. but actually the next few years are absolutely critical to how habitable our planet is going to be in the next ongoing future. And that's both for certain areas of the planet, mainly in the global south, are particularly at jeopardy, but also the whole intergenerational aspect. And there's a diagram here. The IPCC reports are not friendly reading, but they did put this diagram into the summary, which I think actually does kind of help us to start to grapple with kind of how we relate. This is all very anthropocentric, it's very human-centric here. We're not even thinking about all of other God's creatures that have their own integrity and beauty. So this is very human-centered at the moment, this talk. But if we think about our ages and where we might sit in relationship, this kind of shows a diagram of how the planet has been heating and will heat. So, you know, if you're born in 1950, or if you're born like me, kind of in 1964, about here, then I'm still likely, if God willing, I get to live a few more decades, I'm still going to experience some significant impacts of climate change, because basically we are locked in now to certain impacts. These, oh, whoops, let's just go back. This graph here shows how there are different scenarios. The IPCC outlines these different scenarios can happen according to how quickly we transition off fossil fuels. And this lowest one, it shows us trying to stay below 1.5. We're probably going over it. The IPCC report actually said that in the next 10 years, it's highly, highly likely we're going to go over 1.5 because we've just left certain things too late. So likely in the early 2030s, we will go over. Their hope is somehow we can pull back from that. So that's the kind of very low scenarios. But what the report also said is we're at the moment, with where governments are actually implementing their policies, we're going to probably go to 3.2 degrees by the end of this century, 3.2. So we can see there how within the relatively near future, certainly our children's future, there are huge impacts. And this is the reason for the urgency of the next 7 years. Can everyone see the screen? I've got pictures of me in front of it. How do I do? I don't know what to do about that. If I can obliterate my, oh, that's better. Yeah, that's better. So just a couple of brief facts here. I'm not going to overload too much because it's too much to take in. But for a 50% chance of staying below 1.5, the IPCC says we need rapid, deep, and in most cases, immediate greenhouse gas emissions reductions in this decade. And that means cuts of nearly half from 2019 levels by 2030. It means half, so it means drastically changing our current rising trajectory. I've already said that with our current implemented policies, it looks like we're heading to 3.2. It also is true that the projected CO2 emissions from existing fossil fuel infrastructure, that's not expanding, but just existing, would definitely exceed the carbon budget for 1.5. So I just want to say a quick thing about how this is really about rates of consumption of energy, not just population levels. And we can see here how the justice equity sits at the core of this issue, because 10% of households with the highest per capita emissions contribute between 34 to 45% of global consumption-based household greenhouse gas emissions. The bottom 50% only contribute 13 to 15%, a vast difference in terms of individual levels of consumption based on our Western style lifestyles. And injustice is also embedded in this because the most vulnerable communities who have historically contributed the least are disproportionately affected. And again, those are all the nations in the global south, in Africa, Asia, Central and South America, less developed countries, small islands, globally, the Arctic, indigenous peoples. Anyone on a lower income is going to be much, much more vulnerable. I just wanted to share this because I think it is quite shocking that approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people. The total world population hit 8 billion last year, live in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. That's nearly half the global population. And between 2010 and 2020, human mortality from floods, droughts, and storms was 15 times higher in highly vulnerable regions compared to regions with a low vulnerability. And this just shocks me. Roughly half of the world's population currently experience severe water scarcity for at least part of the year due to a combination of climate and non-climatic drivers. So already half of the world's population is really vulnerable to water scarcity. This is far too small to see, taken from one of the IPCC summaries, but it's just so we can see the kind of parts of the globe that are most impacted, which you can see, you know, what I've been talking about. This is about when temperatures reach a certain point with heat and humidity, human beings literally can't survive. And even at 1.7 to 2.3, we can see so many parts of the world are going to be impacted in terms of the likelihood of people, and it's always those people on low incomes, people who won't have access to air conditionings, are vulnerable, are working outside. Those are the people that are going to be vulnerable to dying from excessive temperatures. This is where we are now. This was last year. I'm not going to go through these, but these are all the extreme weather events, flooding, cyclones, temperature rises. This is even just where we are now at 1.1 degrees of global heating above pre-industrial temperatures. The good news is there's loads we can do now. There is actually loads that's within our reach now. So I'm not going to read them all, but there are lots of things that we can do right now. The real question I'm going to go on to talk to is about the political will to do what can be done. But it is certainly true. I think Antonio Guterres quoted this film that we actually need everything everywhere, all at once. So I'm just going to speak briefly just about why I think that we need to engage politically. The church has been really good, I think, around trying to engage, making people more aware about our lifestyles, how we can make changes about our buildings, how we can start to think about making them using less CO2. Perhaps where we haven't perhaps had as much focus is the need to engage politically. And what might that look like? And why do we need to do it? Well, I think it's because I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer had this quote about, you know, do you just tend to the kind of the results of something, or do you stick a wheel in the spoke that's causing it? So sometimes we have to go upstream and start to address the root causes of global heating rather than trying to perhaps attend to some of the, I mean, cool spaces is a fantastic thing. We need to do it. But at the same time, we need to address the root causes. And those are systemic. Those are systemic. They are to do with our economics at its core. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of years of economics that don't take nature into account. It's a little bit of a flaw in our economics. So, you know, you can have something like a country who decides to chop down a virgin forest, sell that wood, its GDP rises, and that forest isn't even counted on the balance sheet, let alone the indigenous small communities that might depend on the forest. So we have this kind of crazy economics that literally sees nature as something to be used for profit for our own ends, but has no value whatsoever in it. So as a result, we're not going to tackle the climate crisis without laws, without legal and regulatory frameworks, partly for business. So business knows within what it's got to operate, and business is actually crying out for these frameworks to happen so they can plan. Business needs certainty. So this is a deeply political issue. And unfortunately, we've had a lack, we could say the crisis at one level has been a crisis of political leadership for the past 30 plus years. We've known about the climate science, but the politicians have not acted on it to anywhere near the level that we need. So we have a crisis of political leadership. So I think also as Christians, we would want our country, the UK, as the nation that started the Industrial Revolution, to take a global moral leadership. And that means we need to act faster. We need to act faster, because there is a justice element here that actually the richer nations need to decarbonize faster to allow the other nations longer. And actually Antonio Guterres said that we really need to set the date now for 2040 for more advanced nations. There's a whole justice issue that we need to be raising with our political leaders to say, we've got to do it faster. We've got to do it faster. I mean, there's also, I could say, there's a strong business case for it. We could say jobs, investment, new industries, and it's going to cost us so much less to mitigate now than suffer the consequences later. So there's a strong business argument for acting sooner rather than later. But I think there's a deeper aspect that we as Christians can speak to, because I think basically we need a new vision, a new political vision for the common good. And I think it's one that isn't just based on a certain model of GDP growth, ever increasing consumption. But we need to talk about another kinds of growth that are absolutely vital, both to humanity and nature's flourishing. That we need to have a vision for a relational vision of flourishing, where human beings are much more connected to each other. They are able to find meaningful work. They're able to feel they can make a contribution. They feel they can live more locally, more connectedly, that actually it's feasible for me to cycle or walk to work, or cycle to my local shops, or walk, or scoot, or whatever is accessible. Somehow life can become more connected, less jumping in my car to drive, to work, to drive my kids to school, to drive to the supermarket. Somehow we could have a more communal and much more healthy way of living, of which nature plays a vital role. The dream of the garden city, we need that dream now. So there's something here about talking to deeper levels of change, a deeper political vision. And the IPCC says that what we need to enable action is human factors like trust, collaboration, recognition, and sharing benefits and burdens. So we need community in order to initiate the change that's needed. So I'll just speak really briefly to what do I mean by political then? What does political look like? Well, today, actually, there was something called the Climate and Ecology Bill that went before Parliament. It was brought by a private member, an MP. But this is a bill that we could be writing to our MPs and saying, have you supported it? 126 have supported it. So just a little action to support a bill. So engaging with our MPs, engaging with local government like this Cool Spaces. The elections are hopefully betraying something there. Hopefully we're going to get elections. When those elections happen, the climate debate needs to be at the heart of it. And we need to be we need to be saying to our MPs, why aren't you doing more? What you're doing is not enough. It's not enough. And then within our churches, I think we need to be hosting speakers, conversations, education in our social media. And I also think the church needs to be increasingly visible in public spaces. And I'm going to let Holly and Mel talk to the protest side of it. I think protest is part of it, but there are other ways we can be visible. I take part in a prayer vigil outside Parliament. So we need to think pilgrimage is another visible thing. So I think we need to think about where can we be more visible in the public space. And I've probably run out of time. I think I have, but I could talk to a whole levels of theology that I also think need to underpin how we approach this as churches. And maybe I did talk to Claire about the possibility of those that are interested, I could offer this as a separate thing that people can opt into. But just to say briefly, I think one of the problems of the climate crisis, it becomes just another issue that churches feel they're struggling. Oh, this is the next thing I have to do on my tick list. Got to show I'm addressing the climate. But I think there's something here about how we come to understand this to lie at the core of our faith. That creation is at the core of why Christ came. He came to save us, but also the whole of creation, because we're all embedded and there is no humanity without creation. And one day heaven and earth are going to be fully reconciled. We're going to have a renewed creation. So creation is at the heart, but I think also God's calling us to a deeper level of discipleship in this. That this is about the formation of our desires. So I'll stop there, and I just I just think this is at the core. Political action is at the core, and discipleship is also at the core of this. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Our time is greatly fast spent, so we'll just move on very swiftly to our next two speakers. And I want to suggest that our next two speakers should aim to finish at about 8:15, 20 past 8. So we'll have time for breakout groups. Thank you very much to Melanie and Holly.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll just, thank you very much, Bishop. I'll just share my screen then. So share screen. Okay. There we go. Some reason my oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you very much. Another PowerPoint, but hopefully it'll be an informative one that kind of accompanies what we're saying. So thank you very much for inviting us today. My name is Holly, and I'm going to be talking alongside Melanie, and we're both from a group called Christian Climate Action. And we're going to be reflecting on where we are now with regards to taking prayerful public action on the climate crisis. And that was the type of kind of political engagement and public action that Vanessa was talking about just then as well. And I guess because we are facing a climate emergency of the nature and the scale that Vanessa was saying, it can be difficult to know what to do to tackle it. And I guess as individuals or as churches, there's lots of different solutions which are thrown our way. And just as Vanessa was saying about the role of this kind of prayerful and public action in the climate crisis, I also, I guess, want to say alongside that one of the other reasons why it's so important to engage in this type of action is because I guess the very nature of the size and scale of the problem. So we are told, as Vanessa was saying, that we need change at the moment at an unprecedented speed and scale. So this means that right now, to tackle the climate crisis, we need societal change to be quicker than even mobilization for the Second World War. And so the very nature of that means that we need government intervention to achieve that. The Climate Change Committee has said that the majority of government policies needed for those changes need to happen in the next 1 to 3 years. I know that Vanessa was talking about that 7-year window, but for that change to happen, actually the policies need to be in place before that, because the policies need a while to have the effect that they're going to have on society. So I really just want to stress that we don't have the luxury of time to do this from a purely behavioural change approach. We don't have the nature of time to basically tackle climate change by encouraging individuals to change all their individual behaviours. We need the government to make the changes needed so that living a low carbon lifestyle is the easiest way of doing things and the cheapest way of doing things. And I'll hand over to Melanie now to say a little bit on the theology.
Theology is a bit of a grand word for it. I think maybe we probably all do theology, but essentially Christian Climate Action is a protest group, because we believe that as Christians we're called to protest injustice, and we believe that our witness should be at the heart of this national political process, because protest really is an outpouring of our calling as advocates for justice and righteousness. And I want to just break that down a little bit, because protest is really quite alien to a lot of Christian thinking. And we ask ourselves, kind of why should we be out there on the streets? We should be praying in our churches. But actually, when we get there out on the streets, what we're doing is lifting our broken political institutions, our systems and processes to God. That's essentially the key to this. But we're also offering, when we do it, we're offering the government a critique of injustice. And that's really important because that lies at the heart of our faith. And by doing this, we can also offer the public a sort of a vision of policies that uphold the common good rather than upholding greed. And we need to be that witness. And there are really important benefits also to ourselves as Christians when we partake in these sorts of actions. This outfacing witness allows us to participate in and experience the blessings, the quite uncomfortable, I have to say, blessings of prophetic action. And there's this huge biblical arc of prophetic action and prophetic voice, and it's important that we engage in it. And it's also an opportunity to pray for ourselves and each other as agents of this change that's so important. And I think at the bottom line for me and for many people who take these kind of actions, we have to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? Wouldn't he be out there with the crowds of people that hunger for justice? Wouldn't he be teaching and encouraging and loving and leading from the front in this visible way? So that's, I think, really the basis of why we engaged in this huge protest called the Big One. And I think Holly's going to tell you a little bit about the Big One and what happened during it, because I think it's really important to recognise that it was actually a success, wasn't it, Holly?
Definitely. So one of the big things that happened recently, as Melanie said, was the Big One protest, which happened between the 21st to the 24th of April. And it happened in London. And first of all, I want to say a huge thank you, because I'm sure that many of you were there with your churches. And thank you so much for inviting us to talk about it before the Big One. It was a really exciting weekend, and I'll just kind of give a short summary of some of the things that happened. So on the Friday, that was the first day of the Big One, there was the No Faith in Fossil Fuels service at St John's Church, Waterloo. And we were expecting kind of the organising group, which also include, I can see, I saw that Heather from the Salvation Army was also on this call, and there were a number of different groups which are involved in organising this, and she was one of them. But we were expecting around 500 people, but they actually ended up being around 1,400 people there. So as you can see from the pictures, the inside of the church was full, and then the space at the back of the church was also full, and then we had to have a second service also carrying alongside it outside. And then we all marched together to Parliament Square via the Shell HQ headquarters. And you can see the Salvation Army band at the top there on the top right. We had Engage Worship who was playing. There were Christian charities that kind of worked together on this. So there was Tear Fund, Christian Aid, CAFOD, Arosha, Green Christian, also some Christian youth charities, young adult charities, Just Love, YCCN, SCM, and actually many more. So there were lots of different groups involved. And there were lots of church leaders as well. So Lord John Sentamu and some other bishops were there. We also had Anthony Cottrell, the head of the Salvation Army. The Reverend Michele Youngston was there to represent the Methodist Church. And so, yeah, it was a really exciting collaboration of different groups that were involved. And then across the weekend, we had a space called the Faith Hub outside Parliament, and we had services run across the weekend. So one of them was run by our friends in Black majority churches. Another one was led by a young Christian friends. And across the weekend, we had both Anglican and Catholic Eucharist, Franciscan prayer walk, and much more. Hand over to you, Melanie.
So a really important part of this 4 days was bringing diverse voices together. What we really wanted to do was to show that whatever Christian tradition you're in, we can all come together in this huge act of worship. We can be a united Christian voice in saying to the government, to business and to society, this matters to us and this matters to you. And I think that we managed to do that we planted a seed, which I think we want to tell you about how this can grow. A part of that seed and that growing concerned press coverage, getting this message out there to other Christians and also to a secular audience. And I think Holly will tell you a bit more about that.
Definitely. So I think just looking at press coverage from a Christian perspective, and I guess kind of as we think about our role as Christians here, just looking at the Christian press coverage is a really important angle to look at, because we do have a voice which is powerful in society and can make real change. So just from a national press perspective, we got pick up in the Times. Reverend Helen Burnett went on Sky to talk about it. We got pieces in the Guardian, Daily Mail, the Independent, but also the church press as well. We got pieces in the Church Times, Premier, the Tablet, Christian Today, and yeah, lots of others as well. But also Britain's only black national newspaper, that's what they call themselves, and I'm sure that's true, is The Voice. And we got a prominent piece in there as well, I think, which was really important.
So I think that one of the things that was really brilliant and also challenged us was the huge number of people that attended that protest over the 4 days. But we really need to build on that, I think, don't we, Holly? We need to get more people, and we need to get, that's why this press attention is really important. We need not only to get the message about climate change out there, but we also need to get the message about protest and about bearing Christian witness on the streets. And I think what this showed this 4 days, the large numbers of people who came, who most of whom, in talking to them, had no real experience of protest, was that there's a real heart, a real hunger even for this. People want to, they feel a need to take their faith out onto the streets. And we need to build on that. And we've been thinking in a way about how we build on this, and building relationships with different groups is really important. It's so important to look at the whole picture, because the climate and biodiversity emergencies are issues for everyone, and everyone has a part to play, a responsibility to do something about it. But it's an intersectional issue, and Vanessa touched on this. So some of the root causes of social injustices that we're concerned with are largely the same as the social injustices that we work with, and tackling them, we need to come together to do this. And we also need to be really aware that this crisis will amplify all the social injustices that we're already fighting. So we need to build these relationships with different groups that are not just fighting the climate emergency, but are fighting all the other ills that come about in society, and all our other oppressions and marginalizations that we as Christians know are so wrong and against God's purpose. So to do that, we want to sort of umbrella something, and we want you to sort of work with us, and we want you to know a bit more about us and the work that we're doing, which is part of the reason we're here. And so I think let's talk about what's coming up next, Holly, because I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, to think about, basically there are, I guess, seasons for different times of action. So obviously the big one was a season where there was, more of this kind of big action, but it kind of ebbs and flows to do with energy levels and recuperation and building and growing and reaching out. And so the next step is a period of embedding people into the prayerful protest. As Melanie said, lots of new people got involved in the big one, which is fantastic. And so as a period of embedding, we've got some new 2 Christian climate action groups coming up online, which you can see on the left, where people can, ask their questions about, share their concerns, know how to kind of get equipped to take the next steps. But also everything we do is bedded under by prayer as well. So in Christian Climate Action, we have morning prayer every day, and then 3 times a week we also have evening prayer as well. So everything we do is underpinned in prayer. We've also got some events coming up soon exploring where you fit into the climate movement. So everyone has their superpower, if that's speaking, if that's admin, if that's kind of, I guess, kind of being a welcomer, if that's, taking action in a particular way. And there's events coming up to help you explore where you sit in that. And you can see that on the CCA events webpage. We also have Earth Vigils coming up, where every Wednesday we're outside of Parliament carrying out a vigil at the Gates of Power every Wednesday. So there's more information about that. And also coming up, we have a specific action outside Shell's AGM, that's in London as well, on May the 23rd. So those are the specific ways, specific kind of actions coming up. But Melanie, I'll hand over to you before we wrap up.
So what we really want to know is, how can we support you? We'd like to help you bring your churches, bring your congregations, bring all the communities that you're involved with along on this journey and into this work of witness. And so we've been thinking about developing some toolkits, some various ways in which we can help other people do this alongside Christian climate action. So the first thing to say is, you can just come to us and ask for guidance. You can email us and we'll respond. We have quite an experience in protest now, and how to do it, in what to do, in how to amplify it through the media. We've also got risk assessments around prayer vigils, around pilgrimage, around indoor events. And we're particularly keen on looking at ways in which we can involve communities that have never protested before and maybe not ready for, some of what we do is civil disobedience, but there'll be a lot of people who are not in any way ready for that. But we can all take prayer vigil actions. They were really powerful for various social justice movements in the past. We will help people do that. We could see if we can accommodate a talk for you in your church community, or even better still, a training day to help equip you to take on this. So yeah, come to us. That, I think, is the message that we'd like to give you. I think that's probably all we've got to say. Are we more or less on time?
I'll stop sharing to hand over.
Thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful for your consideration of the time. I appreciate that. Now, that's really exciting. We've had so much fed to us this evening, and I think it'd be good for us going to breakout groups now. Now the breakout groups. If we could have the breakout groups from now till about 20 to 8, that should give us enough time to discuss the questions that we have before us.
Could I just say my question, Bishop, because I didn't manage to say the question.
Okay, could you put it in the chat so people can take a photograph? Put it in the chat.
Okay.
Or tell us what it is as well.
Well, it was to follow. I think to follow on from Mel and Holly, they're asking what do churches need to engage in that sort of action, and I think my question is just to think about, what do you think your church needs in terms of resourcing, inputting, engaging? So it's part of the same question really as Mel and Holly. Yeah. And for cool spaces. So it's thinking just about, where is your church at, and what do you think what would help it to engage? What would help you to engage more?
Excellent. I think that's pretty straightforward.
And our question, Bishop, is much the same, if I may just say. It's, what do you think your congregation needs to get from us? From where they are to taking public action on the climate emergency. So much the same question. I think that probably lies at the root of what a lot of us are asking.
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Vanessa. And thank you to Michele. So let's go now into our breakup groups till 20 to 8. Sorry, okay. 20 to 9.
We've got 33 participants, so I suggest we have groups of 5 and then a couple with 6 in. Is that okay, Bishop?
Yeah, that's fine. Anything that will work. Okay. Thank you.
All right, just bear with me while I allocate people out. This will be done on a random basis, so it's lucky tip who you get.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. I'm sure you've had a lovely and exciting evening, as I have had. Lots of information, lots of exciting, professionally good keynote speakers.
There's something happening to your sound.
Shall we all try to mute again?
Yes, please. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to say, first of all, a big thank you to the speakers. But before we do that, we're going to go into a short 5-minute session of Q&A. If anybody has a question they desperately want to ask any of these speakers, this is your time to do that. Any questions? Anybody would like to ask either Holly or Melanie or Vanessa, who are still with us? Thank God. Any questions? Okay. I see that you're ready to be quiet because you have been given the opportunity to speak now or forever remain silent. Oh, I see there's a hand up. Jonathan Roberts, please.
Yeah, hi. Just a question for Melanie, because you mentioned about some theology seminar in connection with the environment. Can you say a bit more about that?
I don't recollect kind of.
Maybe
It might have been me.
I think it was Vanessa.
Yeah, so what I was
Right,
wondering was, because there's not time within this format to do a deeper dive into theology, and I had talked about that if people felt that would be helpful, I would be happy to do something like that, because I think that's part of the resourcing we need in order to be active in this realm. So if people wanted that, I would be happy to do that as an additional. So we've got a bit more time to go a bit deeper.
That's wonderful. Or people could invite you to their churches to do that. That makes it more effective because you'll be talking to the real people, not just the leaders, because you know leaders can be gatekeepers for good and for bad. So I think it's important if church leaders want to invite you to their churches. I say the same about Melanie, and I say the same about Holly, because these are real opportunities for us to invite these speakers. They can take the place of a sermon on a Sunday morning. Because this is as important as anything else we'll be teaching about the love of God from the scriptures, because this is basically expressing the love of God for our creation and for each other. Thinking about the impact it's having on other Christians in other parts of the world. Thank you so much. I see another hand up. Is it Peter?
Peter Francis Mullins.
Oh, Peter Francis Mullins, please. Could you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, perhaps if churches got together in a local area, like in East Dulwich, we could get, or Dulwich, we could get, you know, the Anglicans in North Dulwich, Catholics at Dulwich, the United Reformed Church. Maybe if those little local churches got together and you came and did a workshop for us all together rather than as separate churches.
We could do a combo with me and Melanie,
Yeah,
or something like that.
yeah.
That's a good idea. That sounds really lovely. So we were taking our ecumenism to the grassroots and really practical. In fact, I'd like to really encourage that. And perhaps deanery chapters as well, bringing together lots of different Anglican churches in an area to do that, or we could do it ecumenically. So lots of opportunities for us. But I want to suggest, as has been said, that we mustn't let it drop on the floor there. Yeah, I see Bishop Moses has raised his hand.
Yeah, well, I was also suggesting to the group, if we could have Bible study outlines, circulated to the churches. I mean, so discussions could be held in churches, and that would also get to the grassroots. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's some material along those lines already available, isn't it, Vanessa? That we could circulate to CTSL. Maybe CTSL could then circulate it to the church leaders, and the church leaders could then action it in their church. Thank you so much. That's a brilliant idea. Anybody else? Excellent. Thank you so much. In the absence of any more comments, I'd like to, on behalf of the CTSL, say a big thank you to Vanessa, to Melanie, to Holly, and to Michele in absentia. Let's give them a big show of appreciation. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a really, really exciting evening. And just to inform you, just one piece of information for your diary. There will be a meeting. Our next meeting will be in November, and the date has not been fixed, but you'll be informed of it. So watch this space. It will either be in person or by Zoom. And we would like to know what your preference is, but Claire will be dealing with that later. Okay, thank you so much. Could I thank you all for coming tonight? And a special thank you to Patrick, our technical officer, who always quietly behind the scene works out everything and make it to happen for us. So thank you again to all the speakers, and thank you to all of you for your contribution today. And a big congratulations again to Bishop Moses and Reverend Bridget. I think it would be good for us to pray for them. So I'm going to ask Major Val, as we hand over the mantle to them, to please pray for them and then help us finish this meeting with a prayer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for your support over the past couple of years, particularly to Claire for just holding all of this together over, particularly over lockdown. I think of the journey we've had, it's been wonderful. So thank you to you for your heart. And this is a bit of a display of people responding to where God has placed you and held you over that time. So that's great. Bishop Karowei, it's been a joy. And we hand over the mantle to Bishop Moses and to Bridget. Thank you for taking on the responsibilities. Listen, Claire will do everything for you, so that's great. But it's really good to have you in that space, and we pray over you. The prayer I've chosen to pray is one that was used in the Abbey last week, and I think it's so important for all of us. And it's the King's Prayer, and it says, God of compassion and mercy, whose Son was sent not to serve, but to be served, but to serve. Give grace that I might find in thy service perfect freedom, and in that freedom knowledge of thy truth, that I may be a blessing to all of every faith and conviction, that together we may discover the ways of gentleness. I loved that. Amongst everything else that we saw and witnessed and were part of, that we may, and that's my prayer over this group, continue to discover the ways of gentleness and to be led into paths of peace through Jesus. So may the grace of God and the love of God and the grace of Jesus and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with and rest with and remain with each one of you until you meet again. And I'll be thinking of you in November. So every blessing.
We will miss you. We miss you so much. Thank you. Big hand. May the Lord go with you and grant you speed in your next assignment.
Thank you. Thank you
very much for coming this evening. We appreciate you lots, and because you make this happen, and it's been very exciting to be able to be part of this group. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, God bless.